new Dark Age and try to deconstruct some of the myths and misinformation that has led to the universal marginalization of Muslim communities through the fear of Muslims, literally Islamophobia. Today I'd like to tell the story of Mahdi Hashi. Now, Mahdi Hashi is a young man, 24 years old now. He's a British citizen, though his family were from Somalia. He was born in Somalia. He spent most of his life now in Britain, but clearly has ties and allegiances to, you know, his family's homeland. Now, about 4 years ago, when Mahdi was 19 years old then, he was approached by MI5, the British intelligence agency, and they asked Mahdi to spy on his local community, on the people that attended his mosque, on the Somali people that he had contact with, and to report back to them. When he said he didn't want to do this, they then threatened him that, you know, if you don't do this, you will be treated as a terrorist, and, you know, you will suffer the consequences. So today's story is about those consequences. Now, another time I'd like to look at the actual strategy of the British government and this, you know, surveillance of the communities. But today I'd like to concentrate on the consequences of that refusal to spy on his community for the British. The consequences that Mahdi Hashi suffered. Now, you may have heard of extraordinary rendition. This was a process which was widely used under the Bush regime, and one which has been continued by the current Obama regime in the United States. Although that doesn't receive that much publicity now. I think we'd all believed or been led to believe that these bad practices had ended. But Mahdi Hashi has now been the victim of extraordinary rendition. So I'm going to give you a little history lesson now on the history of Somalia to put this into context. So Somalia has a history of foreign involvement. During the Cold War period, it was first exploited by the Soviet Union, or they extended their sphere of influence to Somalia. They supported a local dictator who's called Siad Barre. Now, Siad Barre was somebody who was able to unite all the different clans in Somalia in order to establish his control of the country. The background to Somalia society is that they have this infrastructure of clans. Clans are much like tribes, but quite large tribes, and people's allegiances were to their clan. The actual state of Somalia was something that they didn't have really a concept of. It was an artificial construct that had been created by the European colonialists. First the Italians and then later British. So people had their allegiance to their clans, and Siad Barre was able to unite these clans by much like the feudal system, by actually buying people off and, you know, giving them largesse, giving them benefits, paying off the clan leaders. And that went on for quite a long time, for certainly over 20 years. Siad Barre was first promoted by the Soviet Union, and whilst he was being supported by the Soviet Union, there was a lot of positive progressive development in Somalia. They improved the infrastructure, implemented capital work programs, and it was generally what we would call, by our standards, progressive. Then later, as the Cold War progressed, the United States was able to some extent, overtake the Soviet Union and to take Siad Barre under their wing, you know, to bring him on their side. And so he continued his rule from 1969 until 1991, under US protection and with US support. Now, then, in 1991, Siad Barre actually died, and the Somalia was thrown into a period of chaos, because, like many dictators, unfortunately, he didn't actually create an automatic successor. He'd protected his power so that he was the only one who was able to actually control the country. So then, when he died, the government actually disintegrated to some extent, and the control civil society went back to the clan systems, and unfortunately the clans then had a civil war, a prolonged period of civil war, where individual clan leaders, we might look at them as warlords, fought each other for control of different areas, but at no time was there any overall state system, or was there actually the infrastructure for normal life to continue outside of the clan controlled areas. People were restricted to their clan areas, or to areas which their clan had alliances with other clans. So then the UN decided to intervene. Now, effectively, this was a US intervention on behalf of the UN. So over what would be 20,000 US troops were sent into Somalia, and they basically tried to do what they've done everywhere else, and to actually control the country and suppress the population. However, unfortunately, they'd taken on more than they could actually handle at that time, and there was the incident that has become quite well known through the film Black Hawk Down, where you may recall that a US military helicopter was shot down by these Klan fighters, and the US soldiers were then dragged through the streets of Mogadishu. Following which, the US then withdrew from Somalia and has not since had any direct involvement in Somalia. They now choose to try to exert their control over the country through proxies, different countries who they want to fight their wars for them. This is very much the way that wars are fought now, through proxy allies. So to continue from 1991 to following the US retreat in 1993, there was then a period of civil war where really there was no normal life again in Somalia. Some areas were more stable than others. In the north of Somalia, for example, Puntland and Somaliland had relative stability, but there was still ongoing war around the capital, Mogadishu, and other areas. And it was during this period of anarchy that many external agencies actually took advantage of the relative anarchy, the lack of a central state in Somalia, to exploit their resources and to actually exploit the Somali people. One major catastrophe that took place during this period was the dumping of massive amounts of toxic chemicals into the coastland around Somalia and onto the coastal land. So tankers would go into the Somalia waters and they would just drop all their chemical waste in there. This is one of the reasons why the Somali fishing industry then collapsed, and this was possibly, a factor that led to the fishermen resorting to piracy in order to make a living. But I'm digressing anyway. So you've got in Somalia during this period generally anarchy, but this isn't a positive kind of anarchy. This is an anarchy where there is no civil society and normal life cannot function. For example, people couldn't even hold markets to trade their goods, to trade their crops, and to buy the necessities that they needed. There was no capacity for importing any goods except for arms. The arms continued to flow into Somalia during this period. So what happened next was something that's quite probably unusual and difficult for us to understand as non-Muslim Westerners. But Muslim civil society then developed a prototype of a new form of government, and it was called the United Courts Movement. So people in different areas, in order to resolve issues, to establish some kind of normality, they resorted to Sharia courts. Now, I know that Sharia law has, a kind of very bad image in Western society. We perceive it as, flogging and chopping off of hands and stoning and all these sorts of things. But for the people in Somalia with no law, much like the situation in Afghanistan, I'll just make a quick comparison there. The Sharia courts actually provide
What's your audio then, Nigel? Nigel will be returning to us. We've just lost Nigel off the server, so I'm sure he'll be back with us very soon. Just waiting to see if that'll reconnect. This is the joys of Skype. He's just lost his internet connection, or maybe the information is just Anyway, let's not go there. I'll play you a little bit of Albert Clark and until he returns. Right, Nigel, you're back. It's okay.
Oh, did I lose you?
Yes, it's okay. Carry on, man. You were just making the analogy between Afghanistan.
Okay, with Afghanistan. Yeah, so this was much like during the civil war in Afghanistan, in Kabul, where there was again a civil war between warlords and no law and order. And in Afghanistan, the Taliban brought law and order through the, call it imposition, though this was readily accepted, of Sharia law. Likewise, in Somalia, the United Courts Movement was able to establish a way for people to resolve their grievances, to resolve their complaints and differences with each other without resorting to violence. And this was really a major move, and it created the atmosphere for Somali society to rebuild itself, for commerce to start again. Now, I've actually read UN reports on this period. This would be around 2005 to 2006, where the UN recognized that the United Courts Movement was actually establishing what a form of law and order in the country that had been, an anarchic chaos. With intermittent fighting between warlords. They recognized that commerce had started, that markets were operating, that people were able to travel in the country and move out of their clan areas, because the United Courts Movement had been accepted by the various clans, and their authority was, being accepted by people. Effectively, they were a de facto government, although not in a form that we would recognise, maybe. And therein lies the problem. So, as I say, the UN had recognised that the United Courts movement had brought law and order and stability to Somalia. But on the political level, the UN was committed to supporting and reinstating what they call the transitional government. Now, this was a government that had been established never in Somalia, but actually in Kenya, and what was made up of some of the worst of the warlords, the ones who'd been fighting the civil war in the period of chaos, and who refused to accept the authority of the United Courts movement. So this transitional government, without any consent or support within Somalia, was established in Kenya. And this was then given the backing by the UN, and it then established itself, moved from Kenya to the southern part of Somalia into a town called Badayu, and it effectively controlled this small town called Badayu in the south of Somalia, but had no representation anywhere else in Somalia, particularly in the capital. And so everywhere else was under the authority of the United Courts movement, except for autonomous areas in Puntland and Somaliland, which had treaties, agreements with the United Courts movement. So you've got this transitional government without any local support at all, but which is supported by the UN and, effectively by the Western powers. And yet the United Courts movement has established peace and a normality within the country. So what happened next? Did we give them the chance to continue with this peace and stability? No. What followed was in 2007, and it was around Christmas. I do remember, because I was following this, that during the Christmas period and into the new year, there was an invasion of Somalia by Ethiopian forces. Now, this was not covered at all by any of the media, none of the establishment media. There was a complete blackout, and this was for about 2 to 3 weeks. There was a media blackout on this invasion, where Ethiopian troops invaded the country, ground forces, nominally supporting this transitional government, which really existed in name only, and trying to establish them as the effective dominant government. They bombed Mogadishu, and they occupied, or tried to occupy, the country. So, as you would expect, the forces loyal to the United Courts movement, and indeed most patriotic Somalis, responded to this invasion by resisting it. As any country would respond to occupation, they resisted it, much as the French resistance resisted occupation by Germany during our Second World War, and much as people in Britain or people in the US would resist any kind of attempted invasion or occupation by a foreign invader. So this resistance was called Al-Shabaab, and this is the background to Al-Shabaab. Their aim is obviously to reinstate the Sharia law of the period of the United Courts movement, and to free Somalia from the foreign invaders. So initially these were the Ethiopians, but subsequently the UN, within days of the invasion becoming official, they sanctioned a UN-backed peacekeeping force. For peacekeeping, read occupation force, that was made up of troops from Kenya, from Uganda, and several other different African countries. And this occupation continues to the present day, and Al-Shabaab has continued to resist the occupation, although they have actually quitted the city of Mogadishu following call it Western military support. They still remain, a potent force within Somalia, and they are still committed to resisting foreign occupation and intervention. So, getting back to Mahdi Hashi, like many, young men, he supported, of Somali background, he supported the cause of Al-Shabaab, and he was in a situation where he was being threatened by the British intelligence if he didn't go along with their demands to spy on his own community in the UK. So he left the UK and he went back to Somalia to try to do what he could to support the resistance there, to support Al-Shabaab. Now, we don't know that much about what he did there for the last 2 or so years that he's been in Somalia, but he was actually arrested, or call it kidnapped, from Somalia and taken to the neighbouring territory of Djibouti by unknown forces. From Djibouti, he was tortured and interrogated in Djibouti. From Djibouti, he was then rendered and flown to the US, and this was quite recently. He was flown to the US and indicted for supporting a terrorist group, for working with Al-Shabaab, which is at war with the foreign occupying forces and the now recognized transitional government of Somalia. So at that time, then the British government responded by withdrawing his citizenship, and he is now in the Supermax prison in the US. He's never been to the US. He's never engaged in any activities against the United States or even against, the United Kingdom. His only actions have involved his activities in Somalia and supporting Al-Shabaab, which is a Somali organization, which they do cite that it has links with Al-Qaeda, but this is merely window dressing, because Al-Shabaab is purely a Somali organization, though they may have foreigners now supporting them, but their aims are merely to liberate Somalia and to reinstate Sharia law in Somalia. So effectively, Mahdi Hashi has actually been rendered and tortured, and is now facing trial in the US for alleged support terrorist activities. So really, I'm just trying to build a picture here of how this global war on terror has been extended, so that all rule of law has been undermined. The use of the label terrorist is really used just to incarcerate anybody who doesn't do the wishes of the establishment. So for Mahdi Hashi, the consequences of refusing to spy for MI5 were that he is now in a maximum security prison in the US, facing life imprisonment under those conditions, probably in the Supermax facility in Colorado. So this is just one example. And what I'd like to do, if possible, is to, just now take some questions or callers. Anybody who's out there who wants to know more about Somalia, or indeed about any other aspects of, this global war on terror, or as I would like to call it, the global war of terror. Do we have any callers out there?
We've nobody at the moment, Nigel. There's nobody actually on the line to get in, but a massive amount of information. Absolutely brilliant, Nigel. The chat room, they were saying you're on a roll now. Really good stuff. And it didn't surprise me to find out that this gentleman would end up in the United States under terror. I don't actually point a finger at the United States. This seems to be, well, it doesn't matter. Like I say, even here in the UK, people are being extradited on bogus terror charges. What does, my question was, what does actually links to Al-Qaeda mean? This is something that's stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
Can I just say, Nigel, before you do answer that, if anyone does want to ring in live, and I know we've messed up with the schedule a little bit, most of you didn't know the show was going to come on, and then we have come on an hour late. If you do want to call in the show, just add Bob's Backyard to your Skype, and I'll see that. Give me a little bit of a message that you'd like to come into the call, and we'll get you on chatting with Nigel. But yeah, Nigel, you were a bit quick. You were a bit quick there for us. Have we got any callers? Well, you've only just let them know, so we might get one or two. I know we have a few people in the chat room. Stevie's there, and Esteban, and Robo, and we've currently got 14 people on the live stream, Nigel. So there's which is damn good, to say that there was nobody there when you started. So good stuff, man. Good stuff, and we are recording it all. So that's
okay. Good.
Later.
I'd like to try and pick up on your question, really, because it is a very interesting one. Because we now hear all the time this is a part of the extension of the global war on terror to all theatres, and involving all groups, indigenous groups, who are maybe fighting wars of resistance, national wars. Previously these groups would have been called maybe liberation movements. We would have called them in the 70s or 80s. They're fighting wars for different reasons against their governments, who in most cases we would actually see as being, oppressive, and we previously would have been able to support these, liberation movements. One looks at, the history of liberation movements. The ANC in South Africa, they were dubbed terrorists, and they were on the terror list. The Kurdish groups are now on the terror list. They're fighting for Kurdish rights within different countries, whether it's Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Iran, but depending on where they are, we will treat them either as terrorists or as freedom fighters. And so the use of the term, linked to Al Qaeda, or the latest one is Al Qaeda affiliates. It's like there is this network of Al Qaeda affiliates, and you try to actually quantify this and look at how do they justify this? Have they sworn? For example, have they sworn a fatwa to support Al Qaeda? Or have they pledged their allegiance to the nominal leader of Al Qaeda, al-Zawahiri? Or have they at some point said that they supported the former now deceased leader of Al Qaeda, Osama bin Laden? So quantifying this is very difficult, and it is something that is used all the time now to justify foreign intervention. And I'd just like to really move on to give one example of where this is being used currently to justify foreign intervention in the country of Mali in North Africa. This is going on at the moment. Since last weekend, on I think the Friday or Saturday, a massive invasion of areas in the north of Mali by the French government has been ongoing. They've been bombing towns in the north of Mali with their Mirage jets, They've now sent over 750 ground troops into Mali, and that's French ground troops, supported by troops from neighbouring African ECOWAS states. That's from Senegal, from other neighbouring states in West Africa. And this has been supported by the British government. We actually provided them with logistical support. That is in the form of these loaning them the use of these C-17 transport planes to move their troops and tanks into Mali. So the background for this intervention is that in the north of Mali, there's different ethnic groups in most African countries, and these are often the basis of conflicts, because, as I was stating before, we find it difficult to perceive, I think, our allegiances to this nation state, to the UK or Britain or the US or whatever, whichever state we're a part of. But many other people have allegiances to, a different nationality. In the case of the UK, we've got Scotland and Wales. People have allegiances to those countries before their allegiance to the UK or Great Britain. So in Mali, where there's a lot of different ethnic groups, in the north of Mali, in the Sahara, the predominant ethnic group are called the Tuaregs. These are people of Berber descent who have lived in the Sahara, well, since time immemorial, because the Berbers were, the original inhabitants of the Sahara and North Africa. And they are actually, contrary to our impressions, they're actually Caucasian people. They're white people in Africa rather than being black Africans. And therein lies the one of the reasons for the conflict, because the dominant groups within Mali are black African groups, whether they're, Fuller or Hausa or other ethnic groups. So the Tuaregs have been marginalized in these African states, and that's also been mirrored in other neighbouring African states in the Sahel, and it actually was implemented under colonial rule. So they were marginalised under French colonial rule in Mali, because Mali was a former French colony, much like Chad, Niger, Algeria, all of these areas where the Tuareg lived were predominantly French colonies, and the Tuaregs, because they didn't accept colonial authority and resisted colonial control, and continued to, operate their own independent tribal regimes, they were marginalized by the Europeans and were then marginalized under the nominally independent states that were created from, the French Empire, much like within the British Empire. So this is something that has arisen from colonialism, this conflict between the Tuaregs and the other black African population in Mali, and it's about access to resources, access to I suppose to open society. That there has been ongoing civil war for the last 20 years between Tuareg communities and the states of Niger, Chad, and Mali, and Algeria. They have been in a state of civil war, and they have developed military resistance to this. So that's the background. You have an ongoing conflict in Mali between Tuareg groups who are trying to liberate their areas. So earlier this year, you had
Nigel, just a couple of questions coming from chat. One from Steve. Is there any oil there? Or I suppose I could expand that out to: is there any kind of resource?
Yes, a lot of uranium.
Right.
That's
okay.
the resource. So, right, there is a lot of uranium. It's right. of strategic importance to the nuclear powers, of which France is one, UK, US.
Right, and another question which was from earlier about the Al-Qaeda information. Would this be basically accessing individuals on a database? And I think I can answer that question, and the answer is yes. Basically, the Al-Qaeda list or members is just that. Whether or not it actually exists as a real, who knows? They are basically the ones who are wanted for so-called terrorism. It just seemed amazing how quickly a freedom fighter turns into a terrorist if they're not following the right, or so-called right, political persuasion. When you were speaking to Somalia, Nigel, it reminded me of Rwanda, especially that nobody knew it had happened until after it had happened, the massacres there that were taking.
Yes,
French
very interesting that you should touch on Rwanda, because what has been going on within Africa is that there has been a struggle between the powers, the big powers, for control of Africa. You're probably aware that there's a struggle, that there is, how do you say, there is a conflict over resources. All the big powers want to control the resources of Africa. They want access to those resources. And so Rwanda is an example of where there was a conflict between France and the US. And the Rwandan catastrophe, the genocide, and everything that happened there was a part of that conflict. France and the US made that happen. They let it happen so that they could fight out for control of the government. Now, initially, it was France that had, although they weren't a former colonial power in Rwanda, it had actually been a German, then a Belgian protectorate. Can you excuse me while I just check my phone? I won't be a minute. I've got a phone call, Paul, coming in.
Okay, Nigel.
Can I call you back? Can I call you back? Won't be a minute. Bye.
That's
sorry about that.
That's the wonders of live radio, Nigel.
Yeah. Getting back. So the French had imposed themselves on Rwanda. They actually sponsored the massacre. They provided the weapons, the machetes, the military training for the militias who carried out the massacres. The French were in there and they orchestrated that genocide in Rwanda. Now, not many people know that, Paul. You know, it's widely unpublicised, but
yes,
I can talk about that on another day if you like. And then you will remember that the UN forces, the Belgian forces, pulled out. The UN let it happen, and the US refused to call it genocide. Although they knew what was happening, they wanted things to be played out so that they could ultimately then they could assert their control by letting the massacre happen and continue, and then invading the country from Uganda by opposing Rwandan forces that they were sponsoring. So there is, again, it's proxy war. So the US was arming and supporting through Uganda forces from Rwanda that then invaded Rwanda and now are the current Kagame government. So now the US is the dominant power in Rwanda. The French are history in Rwanda, and interestingly, English is becoming the dominant language, whereas it had been French. So now that's just the kind of power play that is going on in Africa, and that's going on across Africa. But to get back to Mali, now we have a situation where France and the US are working together along with, but there's underlying currents. And as I was saying, just to get back to the story in Mali, we had a situation where Tuareg forces. Now they are all Muslims because that's their religion. Some of them are more Muslim than others, and there are two or three. There's a few different groups which may be more or less fundamentalist than others. The main forces were predominantly secular Tuareg nationalists, and earlier this year they asserted control of the north of Mali. They actually forced the Malian army to retreat, and they took control with the support of much of the population of the north of Mali. Now, at that point, then the Malian army then mutinied, and they staged a coup d'etat. They overthrew the government and imposed military control over the country. And there has been no subsequent elections or democratic government. The government that is now recognized by the West, and which is now being supported by France, nominally they're acting on behalf of this government, is unelected and was imposed by a military coup. The military are controlling the state of Mali, and this is who the British government, the French government predominantly, and other forces, including the US, are supporting. And they've now launched this massive invasion. There is a bombing of civilians. 200,000 people have been made homeless. They are on the move from Mali. There's a massive exodus from that area. There are hundreds of unquantified civilian casualties, though in the kind of terms that we hear, they always allege that they killed so many militants. You know, you will hear, oh well, they killed you know, 20, 30, 40, whatever, militants. Now, militants in our terms are any male over the age of 16 is perceived as being a combatant, much like they are in Afghanistan, in Iraq. So we have no facts on the ground. The narrative, which is that this is an Al-Qaeda affiliate, they're imposing Sharia law and carrying out atrocities, and we've got to step in there and restore, you know, the rule of law and support this, you know, secular government. The facts don't actually support that, but we're very short on facts, and this new imperialist war in Africa is ongoing at the moment. They're bombing as we talk. Hello?
Yep, I'm here, Nigel. It's brilliant, Nigel. The news from Paxmundi, we could call this, definitely. What you're talking about, I mean, I'd heard of it, but I had very little information. I'm asking for questions for you from the chat room, and there they have the same sentiments. They're listening to your information. People getting maps, and there's links to maps of the areas going up in the chat room for people who are there.
So what I would like to say, and I'm going to go in about 5 minutes, Paul, but just relating to this particular scenario in Mali, that the forces that are operating there, these Tuareg groups, are often labelled as Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. The Maghreb is a term for the Sahara area of Africa. It's an indigenous term. It actually means the west of Africa, in Arabic. Now, the history of Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb is that it is a construct. It is a construct. It's an organization, a illusory organization. It's an idea that has been created principally by the state of Algeria and the security forces of Algeria. They have created this concept of Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. They have created paramilitary groups that are in most cases led by by Algerian special forces troops who've been trained by the US, who are operating controlled by the DRS, Algerian military intelligence, and they are creating this concept of Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb in order to justify US and European intervention in Africa so that we can control those resources. So I'm going to leave on that point. I'd like to talk about the history of Algeria and the dark years, and how Algeria was the prototype for the war on terror. The dark years in Algeria from 1992 to 2002 were the prototype for the current global war on terror, and Algeria continues to be a major player in that area, acting in their own interests, but in order to make themselves indispensable and useful to the global powers, to the US, to the UK, and to France. So I just thought I would mention that one. That's for a future show. And I look forward to the next show, Paul. I'm going to leave you now because I've actually got a date.
Well, good on you, mate. Absolutely brilliant information.
I'm taking somebody to see a compost toilet.
Oh, lovely, Nigel. You know how to show a girl a good time. So, ladies and gents,
Yeah.
that was Nigel, as known as Paxmundi and the Paxmundi Show. We will be putting it up on YouTube, so you can listen to that later if you want to. Thank you very much indeed, Nigel. And we will return you to Albert Clark.
Thank you.
And we'll keep running. Thank you, Nigel. Absolutely brilliant stuff, mate.
Bye.
Picked up the pieces to find your increases. Good over evil is our evidence. In this world, it's dread. Your seal is a sign. In the morning we shall rise. Through the sun of gold, oh, for the blue, Mother Nature green. The night is the shadows of the day. Make another day is rising. We shall rise, oh yeah, shall rise. We shall rise,